Hey, welcome back, y'all. So today I'm going to show you from scratch how you can create all your measures that you need and how we're going to create all of our calculated columns to use for all of our measures. So stay tuned, you don't want to miss it. But before we go any further, go ahead and hit that subscribe button down below, leave a like, leave a comment, let me know any thoughts you got or any new content that you want me to develop, and I'll get that added to the queue. With that said, let's get started. All right, today I have a two-step process for you. The first is going to be helper columns, and the second we'll talk about measures, but utilizing all those helper columns that we created to build out those measures from scratch. So the first thing we want to do is click on table view, and I'm just going to do a quick recap of exactly what elements we want to see as calculated columns so that we don't have to build out very large DAX statements. All right, so the first thing we really want to do here within table view is just pan over to our dates and make sure they're formatted in the way that we want to see them as an end user. What I personally like is the day, month, year format. So I know we have two formats here. So all I'm going to do is I'm simply going to hover over end date. I'm going to click on it, click on this drop down here, and I'm just going to select the one to my liking. And then we'll just see that instant change happen. Now, once again, just make sure that you have that date format as well within Power Query so that the column can be read as a date so that you can change the format type here. Now, if you left it as a text format, you're not going to be able to see the date options that are shown right here. Another thing you want to do is make sure your cities and your states are labeled appropriately as well, right? So I can hover over state, go to my data category now, not my format, because it's already a text format, right? So I'm simply going to select the appropriate type, which is already state or province, so no issues there. And Power BI is kind of smart enough to just read what's in the column as well, so we don't really have to change too much. Now this is going to help because what I want to do is I want to see personnel disposition by location, by geographic location. So identifying where they are by state, by city, is really going to help enable that total value on the map that we'll use as well. All right, so once you're complete with all your changes, what we're going to do now is we're going to create 4 helper columns. These 4 helper columns that we create are going to be super beneficial when it comes to creating measures, simply because we don't have to write as much complex DAX. We don't have to do too much on the front end to account for the lack of helper columns that are here within table view. It also kind of makes it easier and optimizes Power BI a little bit more so that there's less processing time. So that's just something else to think about as you're building your own dashboard. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to click on new column, and I'm just going to call this days of absence. So equals, do date diff. We're going to do begin date, end date, and then by day. So what this is going to do for me is this is going to show me the difference between the two dates. So I know I talked about a date diff video that I did before. So this is just a quick recap once again, just so we can see what the difference is between the two dates by a total day value. So we're going to go ahead and run that, and here we have it. So the next calculated column I want to create is I want to show out of all these absences that are within this queue, this table right now. So I want to identify which ones are outside of the US, the continental US, and then which ones are not. So give me a yes or a 1 as a binary indicator if it is, and then if it isn't, just give me a 0 or no. So we're going to say is outside US equals if not, open that parentheses, contains row. All right, so what contains row is going to allow me to do is it's going to allow me to list all of the values that I want within a certain column so that I can see is any of this criteria met. So the criteria that I want to list in here is going to be all the continental US states, right? Now I can do that by putting in this curly bracket here so that we can see all of the states within one bracket so that I don't have to do multiple if statements. So that's where the if and contains row kind of coupled together come into play. And the benefit with the not being in there as well before the contains row is it's going to basically say, hey, if it's not any of these, then give me a yes or no. Now, just for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste all the states in here. I'm going to go by state. I'm going to wrap up the contains row DAX within this expression. I'm going to wrap up the not as well because it's saying if it's not any of these states, right? So that's how these now come into play. So it's important that when you're writing your DAX, you're bracketing it in a certain manner so that you can see when certain DAX expressions start and when they end as well, and what's kind of encompassing what. Now what we're doing is we're working simply in the if section, right? So we've already did our logical test piece. So we're doing a result if true. So if the result is true, just give me a yes. And then if it's not, make sure you put a comma, unlike me. You say no, and then we're just going to close that up. We're going to run that, and here we have our calculated column. So just to verify, I'm going to select the ones that are yes. So none of that criteria for those continental US states were met, therefore it returns me a yes, because they are outside of the US. So that's just another tip. As you're writing your calculated columns as well, go ahead and validate just to make sure you're not crazy, because sometimes I'm crazy when I develop my stuff right. You may not be right the first time always. So go ahead, just validate what you're doing just to make sure you're on track. All right, so the next one we want to work on is we want to define all of these codes, right? So we have A, D, and P. So what do they really mean? So we have approved, we have denied, and we have pending. So that may not be universally known to the end user. So I just want to simply define those so that when we're using them within a slicer, we don't see these codes, we see those long name definitions. So once again, I'm just going to click on new column. And since this was called workflow status, I'm just going to go ahead and call this absence workflow. Say equals, you do if workflow status equals A, then return me approved. If, and we're going to just keep the same kind of logic going on. So I'm just going to copy this version of the expression just so I don't have to type it over and over again. We're going to say D, next is denied. Shift enter, I'm going to tab it, press if again. We're going to control V, and we're going to say P is pending, comma, shift enter, tab if, run it back, T. Now I'm adding these just in case something happens, something falls through, whatever the case may be. I just have a fail safe built in. Even though I remove these completely from Power Query, I'm just going to go ahead and code them as well, just so everybody knows that adopts this dashboard, they know what these codes mean as well over time. I'm going to do N not active if C canceled. If it doesn't meet the intent for any of those, it's just going to say other. All right, and now we're just going to wrap all these up. So we can see each time I close the parentheses, it's going to tell me exactly which one is referring to from the starting point of that function, right? So I'm just going to keep closing them up, and there we are. And now we have approved, denied, and pending. We can just scroll over, kind of glance at those. We can see that the P's here, and we have a bunch of A's, and everything looks solid. All right, so the last helper column that we're going to create is we're going to identify if today's date is currently on absence or not. So we're going to name this is on absence equals if today is greater than or equal to begin date and today is less than or equal to end date. Then give me a yes. If not, then give me a no. And let's just close that up. So this is basically going to tell me who is currently on absence as of this current day. So that's going to drive another measure as well that we're going to create. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply click on yes. So this is basically telling me if it's a yes, that means today's date right now, the begin date and end date is kind of surrounding that date, right? So I'm going to go to the front and I'm going to see that between these two dates of 15 August and 1 November, we have today's date, which is 30 October. So we're good here. And keep going down the line a little bit. Yep, we're good here, here, here. And I'm just going to go ahead and check that for the ends as well, just to double tap. And it looks like these are all future dated or past dated as well. So I think we're good here as well. All right, so that's going to be it for table view. The rest of our work is going to be done in report view. We're going to create all of our measures, about 10 or so. And then after that, we're going to go into another video following this one, and we're going to dive into how to create our report from the ground up, all visuals, everything from scratch. All right, so before I start writing my measures, I just want to recap on how I like to organize my DAX measures personally. So I like to put all of my stuff within an actual measure folder. So I have a measure folder that's separate from the data source that's coming in, simply because I can keep all my math, all my calculations in one location so I can refer back to it easier rather than scrolling through an entire table of data and trying to find where my measure really is, right? So the only thing I have within my data source of Absence Analytics is going to be all my calculated columns and then all the work that I did in Power Query, which is just already nested within the table itself, right? And then my measures are going to be provided and created within this measure table that we have. All right, so when you get to this point of trying to create your own report, what you want to do is really brainstorm and think about what data points you really want to present to the end user. And this is really where all your math comes in before you start designing things, right? Is you want to ensure that you have all your data points lined up properly before you start building so that you can just focus on that aesthetic solely versus, trying to do math at the same time, and it just creates a little bit of fogginess and you may forget something as well. So there also is some homework that's kind of tied with this as well. So ensuring that you think about this whole process prior to getting to this point too, so that you don't have to think about it too much in this step. But if you are already here, it's fine as well. Just think about what data points you want. So we are going to build 10 measures from scratch. Think of them as helper columns, but we're just having them as sole calculations versus a helper column, which is essentially a column that's being added to a table of data that gives you a by name text or value parent to a member's data or that row of data that's within that table. So as we're looking at this dashboard right now, we can see that we're going to need the available total, we're going to need the available percentage, we're going to need how many people are on absence, total on absence percentage, average days, so using that date diff one that we created earlier, pending within 10 days, so just identifying which absences are going to start within 10 days so that we can see, hey, these ones probably need to get approved pretty soon, so just showing a value of that as well. We have total pending absences, total absences outside and then inside the continental US. So that's going to cover all of our measures and that's going to help us really articulate where our absence state is at within our entire formation. All right, so when you create a measure, you want to ensure that you're clicking on the table that you want to insert that measure in. So I'm going to click on the Absence Analytics measures and I'm going to go ahead and create new measure. We're just going to zoom in a bunch so you can see what I'm looking at. We're going to do average days first equals, I'm going to do average days of absence, and we're just going to wrap that up. Pretty simple, right? So that's just going to give me a total value of the average that we have across that entire organization. So let's just go ahead and run this. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in a card. And what I want to do for every single measure that I always create is I want to click on it and I want to ensure that we change auto to 0. So it's going to either round up or down appropriately. And then if you have 1,000 separator, go ahead and insert that 1,000 separator as well. And then what I'm going to do as well is I'm going to just create a slicer here just so I can show you some things as well. I'm just going to put brigade here, duplicate this. For this one, I'll put battalion. For this one, I'll put company. Now, I tossed up a couple of slicers in here. Now, it does show blank, and we're going to remove that later on, but I just want to show an example of what can occur if there's no applicable data for a certain measure, right? So right here, we have blank. It honestly shows that you have an incomplete dashboard. So what we want to do is instead show a 0. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our measure. We're going to wrap this in a coalesce DAX statement. So we're going to say coalesce, comma, 0, and we're going to close that. And now we're just going to see what happens. There you have it. So rather than a blank, we're going to see a simple value of 0. So I just recommend that you do that for all your measures so that it's clean and you have a final product aesthetically. All right, so I'm just going to delete these slicers. I don't need them anymore. I'm going to keep this measure here just so I can keep swapping it out and verifying as I go. So we can delete this, but we're going to retain the measure here, of course. And now we're going to create a new one. So this one we're going to do inside continental US equals, we're going to do a coalesce, calculate, we're going to count rows. We're going to count rows for the whole table. So we got to reference that one. We're going to close that up. We're going to put a comma there. We're going to press or shift enter. We're going to say is outside US. Now remember, what we put was yes or no, right, as our binary. So what we want to do is identify, since we're looking for inside continental US, we're going to say no. And we have to make sure that the sentence casing is also correct, because if it's not going to read it. So it needs to be exactly what the value is here. Then we're going to wrap up the calculate. We're going to wrap up the coalesce as well. All right, so with the combo of calculate and count rows, so essentially count rows is going to count how many rows of data we have in absence analytics, and then count rows is going to come in over the top essentially and count how many within the table and the column of is outside US in absence analytics is no. And it's going to return me that result with the wrap of coalesce. So we're just going to hit that check mark here. And now we're just going to click on that value, right? And we're going to put that 1,000 separator because at times that data may exceed 1,000. And we're just going to put that value in here. So we have 4,356. So just to validate that data, we're going to go ahead and we're going to go to our table now. We're going to scroll over to is outside US. We're going to select no. And we're going to see that our data at the very bottom is going to show 4,356 on the bottom left out of 5,061 rows. So our numbers match, so we're good to go here. All right, so for the next measure, what we're going to do is we're going to simply copy and paste this one. We're going to press escape. We're going to go ahead and create a new measure now. We're going to paste that one in here, and we're just going to change this to outside continental US, and we're going to change this to a yes. And we're going to run that one. And now what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing. We're going to make sure we have the 1,000 separator, and we're just going to validate that this data matches what's in table view as well, which it does. And just like that, we have 3 measures already done. All right, so the next one we're going to do is pending absences within 10 days. So if they start within 10 days. So we're going to say pending within 10 days. Say equals, we're going to do a coalesce, calculate, count rows, do absence analytics, close that up, comma, shift enter, and then we're going to do workflow status. We're going to keep this one as the status code, and we're going to say P. We're going to do and begin date is less than or equal to today plus 10. So going 10 days back now. And the double and just simply means it's another criteria we're looking at rather than a comma, because it's all nested within the same DAX expression. So it's all one combined joined filter. We're going to do end date. We're going to do greater than or equal to today. Now we're going to do a close parentheses. We're going to go to coalesce. We're going to press a comma, 0, and close that up. And now essentially what this is going to tell us is that if someone has a pending absence that's starting within 10 days, it'll give us that total value. So we're going to run that. We're going to highlight it. We're going to make sure it's 0 and not auto. We can add a comma if we want to, if we believe it's going to have 1,000 separator at some point in time. And then we're just going to simply put that value in here. And then we can validate that by setting up filters within table view and just identifying which ones are pending and starting within 10 days. All right, so the next one we're going to do is we're going to do all pending absences. So we're just going to copy this completely. We're going to create a new measure here. Just say pending absences. We're going to delete all this because we no longer need it. We're going to delete the extra and we're just going to leave the rest. We're going to run that. We put that 1,000 separator again. We're now going to click on the DAX measure that we created, and we have a total of 585. All right, we have 5 measures down. We got 5 more to go. All right, so the next one we're going to do is we're going to do a total. So total absences equals coalesce count. And this one, it really does not matter which column you really select to count, as long as that column has data in every single row. So just for the sake of it, I'm going to do reason description. You can do name as well if you want. Now close that up, put a comma, 0. I'm going to close that as well for the coalesce. I'm going to run that. I'm going to click on it, put 1,000 separator, and then I'm just going to validate that. So we have 5,061 total absences. So I did create a PSD assigned measure, and this one's going to be important. I nested this within the PSD assigned measures folder, the table as well, just so I can count how many people are within the total roster. And this does use a use relationship DAX, and we'll talk about that later time. But I just want to present this to you because we're going to use this to calculate as well. So another one that's a little bit complex, but I'm going to explain to you at a different time as well, is going to be a date table. But I will talk about why it's important right now. So the importance of a date table is going to be is taking that begin date and that end date and kind of merging them into one column within a different table so that we can then create a slicer based upon that entire range and not just a slicer based upon the begin or end date. So for example, if I created a slicer right now and I went to my absence analytics and I put begin date in there, it will not let me put end date as well. So you can see how the range is just set up oddly is because now it's showing every instance. So every single begin date and then end date subject to that row as well. So if I remove the end date from my field, I'd only show begin date within that slider or selection box that we have. But what it doesn't help with is now I can only set my range if I'm trying to narrow down a result on saying, hey, what's my availability during a forecasted date, such as the first week of December, for example, how many people are going to be on absence. I can only slice based upon the begin date or end date, right? So if somebody's absence actually started on, 30 November, for example, and ended on 3 December, I could see that they're on absence from 30 November. Within this slicer is not going to show me that they're returning on 3 December, right? So I'm not going to be able to see a dynamic display of those two dates kind of joined together. So instead, with the date table, what we're going to be able to do is have a range. So it's going to take both of those dates together and say, hey, if this person has an absence between these two dates at all, then it's going to return something based upon your calculation of saying, hey, this person's on absence, they're unavailable, or they are available. But I did just want to show you that in a slicer within Power BI, you cannot put a begin and end date simply. All right, so to create a date table, what we want to do is we want to go to Model View, and we're going to go ahead and create a new table. All right, so what we're going to do is insert here this exact DAX expression. So calendar, min, absence begin date, max absence end date. So what I just spoke about before is going to take the earliest date that it can find the entire absence analytics table and then the latest date it can find and then create an entire date band based upon those two dates. So I'm just going to run this real quick just so I can show you what it looks like. We have an absence date table and we'll draw that relationship real quick as well. So we're going to draw it to the begin date first. It could be a many to one. And then we're also going to draw it to the end date, and that's important as well. And we're going to make that one inactive because we can only make one of those dates active because they're both connected, right? And we're not going to connect it to anything else because it's just going to be a direct feed to Absence Analytics. All right, so once we get here, we're going to see that the earliest date is May 15th, 2024. And then what we're going to do here is we're just going to change this date format. And here we are. All right, so the next one we want to build is identify how many people are on absence right now. So we're going to call this on absence equals, we're going to do coalesce, calculate. We're going to do distinct count. Distinct count because only one person, they can only be on one absence at a time, right? So we only count that person one time. So we're going to say employee ID absence analytics because that is a distinct value to that member, comma, we're going to do workflow status because that's the one we created. We're going to say equals approved, comma, we're going to say begin date of absence analytics is less than or equal to the max date that's in the date table, which has a column of date. We're going to close that up. We're going to say and just moving on to another compounded filter, right? We're going to say end date now of absence analytics. We're going to say it's greater than or equal to the min of the date table. Date. We're going to close that up. We're going to go to calculate. We're going to close that up. We're going to put a comma. We're going to put 0 for coalesce. And we're going to close that as well. And just to summarize, right? So coalesce, we already talked about that before. Calculate is essentially tallying all of this up in the distinct count, right? Distinct count is going to look at only one approved absence per member. If that absence is within this range, then count it. But it's only going to count it if they're approved and count them one time. So now, as you can see, there's no range in here, right? So we're not specifying, hey, we want to look at absences from 1 November to 30 November. We're not doing that because we want to do is allow the end user to specify what date band they really want to look at. So this, more than anything else, is just going to total how many absences are approved within the entire date table of the one that we created. Now what we're going to do is once again click on it, ensure it's a whole number, press comma, get that 1000 separator in there, go to on absence, and we have 3,876 currently on absence out of that entire table. All right, so the next one we're going to do is we're going to do an on absence percentage. On absence, and then what I do is I just put a percent just to make it easier because I have a measure written out for on absence, which is a whole value. So I just put percent for the next one. And now I'm going to do divide on absence, which is the one measure we just wrote. So we're referencing that. We're going to divide the numerator by the denominator. The denominator is going to be assigned. So my total assigned personnel. And then if I don't have a result that returns, because sometimes it may return NaN, which is an improper value, or infinity, or something to that extent, depending on how you're slicing your data or filtering your data, you're going to return a 0. And we're just going to run that. And now we're going to click on that measure. It's going to be a percent, so we want to make sure we click on that. So here's going to be really dealer's choice, right? So what kind of decimal position do you really want? So right now we have 2. I'm just going to leave it as 2. You can leave it as 1 as well. Depends on what you want. And here we have 31.86%. All right, so the last two we're going to do is available and available percentage. So we're going to say available equals coalesce assigned. We want to see how many people we have assigned minus on absence. So this is essentially going to say our total personnel that we have in our entire organization minus how many people are currently on absence, return me that whole value. And then obviously a 0 for coalesce, and we're just going to run that. And we have 8,290 that are available. You should always spell correctly too. Unlike me, I guess I'm not good at spelling. And next what we're going to do is we're going to put an available percentage. So same concept as the other percentage that we did. Available percent. I spelled it right this time. We're going to do divide, do available, assigned, comma, 0, so we can account for those errors, right? And now we're just going to put that percent value in there. It defaults to 2. That's fine with me. And now we have 68.14%. And if I want to duplicate this, just to validate the last few measures that we did, we're going to remove this one. I'm going to say on absence percent. These two are going to total 100%. So now we know our values are right. All right, so with that said, that concludes all the helper columns, all the measures that we need to do for this entire dashboard. So now we can really get into the fun part in the next video, which is creating the visualization from scratch as well. That's really where your money's going to be made at. So I'll explain that very thoroughly in the next video, but I hope you're able to learn a lot with this one. And we'll also break out a lot of these measures and helper columns that we really created from scratch as well, and go into real deep detail on kind of what they are and how they're really utilized. But for now, thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more.